I had always known that public life came with unexpected twists, but nothing could have prepared me for that fateful day. As I sat backstage at the Manhattan Media Center, my heart pounded with anticipation and a trace of unease. The makeup artist, Tina, had just finished touching up my face, ensuring not a single bead of sweat would be visible under the harsh studio lights. My Armani suit felt suddenly tight around the collar despite being perfectly tailored just weeks ago. 5 minutes, Mr. Reynolds, called out the young production assistant with the clipboard and headset. She couldn't have been more than 25, reminded me of my own daughter from my first marriage, ambitious, precise, no nonsense. I nodded, swallowing hard as I recalled all the challenges I had overcome to reach my position as CEO of Nextech Innovations. From my humble beginnings in a Boston suburb to becoming a fixture on the Forbes list, my journey had been anything but conventional. Now, facing Jimmy Carr's notorious interview show The Hot Seat, I was determined to shine despite my inner doubts. My phone buzzed with a text from my PR director, Melissa. Remember, deflect questions about the Westland merger. Focus on philanthropy and the clean energy initiative. I typed back a quick "got it" and slipped the phone into my pocket. PR teams, always thinking 3 steps ahead. That's why I paid them the big bucks, after all. The Westland merger had been controversial, to say the least. Nearly 2,000 jobs lost, but the shareholders had been ecstatic. The stock had jumped 15 points overnight. Before stepping on stage, I rehearsed my responses one last time in my head. I envisioned a smooth interview. Charming, authoritative, maybe even a touch of self-deprecating humor that Americans seem to love from their business titans. The bustling energy of the crew and the hum of the live audience beyond the curtain reminded me that every moment on screen was a high-stakes performance. One wrong word, one misplaced gesture, and Twitter would be ablaze before the commercial break. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions that churned inside me. 25 years of building an empire, and somehow these 15 minutes of television still had the power to terrify me. "Mr. Reynolds? They're ready for you now," the assistant said, holding the curtain aside. My thoughts wandered to the countless decisions, both brilliant and painful, that had led me to this moment. The late nights at the office when Madison was young, missing her ballet recitals and school plays. The look on Sarah's face when I told her I wanted a divorce after 15 years of marriage. The phone call from my father that I'd ignored the day before he died because I was in the middle of closing the Peterson deal. The weight of my past felt like a silent companion, one I had tried to bury under the trappings of success. The penthouse on Fifth Avenue, the summer home in the Hamptons, the private jet, the yacht named after my mother. Little did I know that buried past was about to resurface in the most unexpected way. "Remember to smile," Melissa whispered as she appeared beside me for one final pep talk. "You've got this, James." I straightened my tie and squared my shoulders. Beyond the curtain, I could hear Jimmy Carr warming up the audience with his trademark sardonic humor. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the man who revolutionized smart home technology and made billions doing it, the CEO of Nextech Innovations, James Reynolds. The applause swelled as I strode onto the set, my practiced smile firmly in place. The studio lights were blinding, making the audience a faceless mass beyond the stage. Only Jimmy was clearly visible, rising from behind his sleek desk to shake my hand. "James, welcome to the hot seat," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Jimmy had built his reputation on making corporate bigwigs squirm, on finding the one question they didn't want to answer and hammering it relentlessly. I'd watched him reduce the CEO of a major airline to stuttering incoherence just last month. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's great to be here." As I settled into the plush guest chair, I noticed the glass of water strategically placed on the small table beside me. I resisted the urge to reach for it immediately, a sign of nervousness that Jimmy would surely pounce on. The red light on the camera blinked on, and I knew we were live to millions of homes across America. The game had begun, and I was determined to play it well. After all, I hadn't built a tech empire without learning how to control a narrative. This was just another boardroom, another negotiation, another performance. Little did I know that all my preparation would mean nothing in the face of what was about to happen. The carefully constructed walls around my personal life were about to be breached in the most public and painful way possible. and I would be powerless to stop it. Stepping into the spotlight, I began the live TV interview with the confidence of someone who had mastered every boardroom battle from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. The studio lights felt warm against my skin as Jimmy leaned forward, elbows on his desk, ready to begin. Despite his reputation as a corporate executioner, he started gentle. James Reynolds, Next Tech Innovations is now valued at over $70 billion. Not bad for a company you started in your garage in Cambridge 20 years ago. I smiled, settling into the familiar rhythm of my origin story. My garage and about $50,000 of credit card debt, Jimmy. Let's not forget that part. The audience laughed, and I felt myself relaxing slightly. This was familiar territory. The smart home technology market was practically non-existent when you entered it, Jimmy continued. Now it's projected to hit $200 billion annually by next year, and Nextech controls nearly 40% of that. What made you see the potential before anyone else? I'd love to claim some stroke of genius, I said, leaning back in my chair. But the truth is simpler. I was lazy. Another ripple of laughter from the audience. I kept forgetting to turn off lights when I left rooms, and my first wife, Sarah, used to give me hell about our electricity bills. I figured there had to be a way to automate everything. Turns out, millions of Americans were just as lazy as me. Jimmy nodded appreciatively. From laziness to billions. The American dream indeed. The questions started light, filled with admiration for the achievements and innovations that defined my career. I answered each query thoughtfully, my words flowing with the precision of a well-rehearsed script. We covered my early failures, the first breakthrough product, the Nextlight system that revolutionized home lighting control, and the expansion into security, climate control, and entertainment systems. Yet as the interview progressed, the questions grew more probing and personal, as I knew they eventually would. Jimmy Carr hadn't earned his reputation by lobbing softballs. Your company's acquisition of Westland Tech last year resulted in 1,900 layoffs, he said, his tone shifting subtly. Critics say you gutted an American institution to pad your bottom line. How do you respond to that? I took a small sip of water, buying myself a moment. Viewers from Bangor to San Diego were watching, and their curiosity often strayed into territories that exposed the raw underbelly of corporate ambition. I felt the familiar pressure of being dissected by millions. Business decisions are never easy, Jimmy, especially when they affect people's livelihoods. I began, using the practiced phrasing Melissa and I had worked on. The reality is that Westland's manufacturing processes were outdated by nearly a decade. They were losing market share every quarter, and without intervention, all 5,000 employees would have lost their jobs within 18 months when the company inevitably folded. So you're saying those 1,900 people should thank you for only taking their jobs, not all 5,000 jobs? Jimmy pressed. I'm saying we saved over 3,000 jobs, invested $200 million in modernizing the remaining facilities, and established a retraining program for every laid-off worker who wanted it. I maintained eye contact, refusing to look defensive. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best possible outcome in a difficult situation. Jimmy nodded slowly, not entirely convinced, but ready to move on. The audience seemed divided, some nodding in agreement, others looking skeptical. Let's talk about your personal life. Jimmy pivoted, and I felt a slight tightening in my chest. 2 marriages, 2 divorces. Your ex-wife Sarah gave quite the revealing interview to Vanity Fair last year. I maintained my smile, though it felt wooden now. Sarah's interview had been brutal, painting me as a workaholic who'd chosen his company over his family at every turn. Some of it was exaggerated, but enough was true to sting. Sarah and I have different perspectives on our time together, I said carefully. I respect her right to share hers. She specifically mentioned missing your daughter Madison's high school graduation because you were closing the Tokyo deal. A direct hit. I remembered that day with painful clarity. The frantic video call I'd made from my hotel room in Japan, watching Madison accept her diploma through a pixelated screen while signing documents between glances. The disappointment in her eyes had been unmistakable, even through the poor connection. That's one of my deepest regrets, I admitted. Deciding honesty might serve me better than deflection. I've made mistakes as a father. I'm trying to do better. In those moments, I found myself reflecting on every decision that had brought me here. The calculated risks, the losses, and even the sacrifices that had shaped my identity. Missing Christmas mornings because some crisis needed handling. Checking email during my mother's funeral. The way Madison had stopped calling me dad and started using James after the divorce. My narrative was not just a story of success, but a tapestry woven with moments of vulnerability and regret, elements that I had long tried to keep hidden from the world. Jimmy seemed momentarily surprised by my candor, but quickly recovered. Your current girlfriend, Elise Chun, is 26 years younger than you and a former Nextech employee. There have been rumors. Elise was never my subordinate. I cut in sharply. She worked in an entirely different division, and we began dating months after she left the company to start her own nonprofit. The age difference is our business, not the public's. That came out more defensive than I'd intended, and I could see Jimmy mentally adding it to his arsenal. The studio suddenly felt too warm, too close. I was losing control of the narrative, something that rarely happened in my carefully managed public appearances. Your father passed away 5 years ago, Jimmy continued, changing tack. You've spoken very little about him publicly. My father. Another complicated subject. We'd been estranged for years before his death, his blue-collar values clashing with what he saw as my growing corporate callousness. He'd refused financial support, living out his final years in the same modest Boston home where I'd grown up. The missed call the day before his heart attack remained one of my most painful memories. My father was a good man, I said simply, feeling suddenly exposed. He taught high school English for 40 years and never earned in his lifetime what I make in a day. That fact wasn't lost on either of us. As I spoke, the cameras caught every micro-expression, every slight hesitation. From someone who spent his days orchestrating billion-dollar deals with tactical precision, this vulnerability felt foreign and dangerous. The boundaries between public and private were blurring in ways that made me profoundly uncomfortable. And what would he think of the man you've become? Jimmy asked softly, the question hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. Before I could formulate a response, something unexpected happened, an interruption that would change the course of not just the interview, but my life itself. Suddenly, the flow of questions was interrupted by a voice so delicate yet piercing that it cut through the noise of the broadcast. It came from somewhere in the audience, a section that had been kept in shadow from my perspective on stage. Don't you miss my mom, who forgot you? The question hung in the air like a frozen frame, leaving me momentarily speechless and exposed. The voice was young, perhaps belonging to a girl of 12 or 13. I felt the blood drain from my face as I scanned the audience, trying to locate its source. Jimmy looked as startled as I was, his professional demeanor momentarily shattered. The production crew seemed to be scrambling. I could see frantic movement in my peripheral vision as stage managers whispered urgently into headsets. I'm sorry about this interruption, folks, Jimmy began, attempting to regain control of his show. Security, could you please? It's okay, I said, raising my hand to stop him. Something about that voice had reached deep inside me, triggering a recognition I couldn't immediately place. Who's asking? A spotlight swung to illuminate a slender girl standing in the third row. She wore a simple blue dress, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Even from a distance, I could see that her hands were trembling, though her expression remained resolute. A woman sat beside her, presumably her guardian, looking mortified yet somehow determined. My name is Lily, the girl said, her voice now amplified by a microphone that had been hastily pointed in her direction. Lily Winters. Winters. The name hit me like a physical blow. Rebecca's daughter? I heard myself ask, though I already knew the answer. The resemblance was unmistakable now. The same dark eyes, the same determined set of the jaw. The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence as the shock of the interruption rippled through everyone present. I could feel my heart racing, and a sense of dread washed over me as I realized the profound impact of that unexpected query. It was as if the voice had unlocked a hidden chamber of memories and emotions I had long suppressed. Rebecca Winters, a name I hadn't uttered aloud in nearly 14 years. Yes, Lily answered simply. You knew her before she got sick. Before she got sick. Such a simple phrase to describe the devastating progression of early-onset Alzheimer's that had claimed Rebecca's memories piece by piece, until the brilliant research scientist I had once known was reduced to a shell of herself, unable to recognize her own daughter or me. In that suspended moment, every eye was on me. The question was not just a random interruption. It was a pointed reminder of a painful chapter in my life, one that I had desperately tried to escape. I grappled with the realization that the past had found a way to crash the carefully curated image I had built over the years. Jimmy, ever the professional, seemed torn between journalistic instinct and human decency. "Mr. Reynolds, would you like to take a break?" he asked quietly. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'd like to answer Lily's question." I turned back to face the girl, Rebecca's daughter, who stood waiting for an answer with the patient dignity of someone far beyond her years. "Yes, Lily, I miss your mother every day." The truth of that statement surprised even me as it left my lips. 14 years of carefully constructed barriers crumbled in an instant. The woman beside Lily, who I now recognized as Rebecca's sister, Claire, looked as shocked as everyone else at my candor. She had never approved of my relationship with her sister, had been openly hostile when I stepped away after Rebecca's diagnosis became terminal. "You left," Lily said simply, the accusation hanging in the air between us. The audience was deathly quiet now, collectively holding their breath. This had transcended entertainment. They were witnessing something raw and unscripted that none of them, least of all Jimmy Carr, had anticipated. "I did," I acknowledged. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of this unplanned confrontation. My PR team was probably having collective heart attacks backstage. And it's the most cowardly thing I've ever done. I could see Melissa frantically signaling from the wings, undoubtedly wanting me to end this conversation immediately. For perhaps the first time in my professional life, I completely ignored the PR playbook. "Your mother and I worked together at MIT's neuroscience department," I explained, speaking directly to Lily though aware of the millions listening. This was before Next Tech, before everything. She was the brilliant one. I was just an engineer with ideas. We were engaged to be married when she was diagnosed. The memories flooded back with surprising clarity. The small Cambridge apartment we'd shared, Rebecca's laboratory with its organized chaos, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her research. The devastating day at Massachusetts General Hospital when the neurologist had delivered the news that changed everything. She was 32. I continued. I was 34. The doctors gave her 5 years at most before the disease would progress to the point where she wouldn't recognize anyone. She made a decision that I fought against but ultimately had to respect. She wanted to end our engagement. Lily's eyes never left mine. "But that wasn't why you left." Perceptive, like her mother. I swallowed hard before answering. "No, it wasn't. I stayed for the first year after her diagnosis. Tried to be there for her. But watching her brilliant mind deteriorate day by day." I paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound like excuses. I told myself I was respecting her wishes by moving on with my life, by building Next Tech. The truth is, I couldn't bear to watch her disappear piece by piece. So I ran away to California and buried myself in work. Claire stood up beside Lily now, placing a protective hand on her niece's shoulder. "You never even called to check on her," she said, her voice tight with years of pent-up anger. "Do you know that she asked for you? Even after she forgot who you were? She'd say there was a man with kind eyes who used to visit, and she missed him." Those words struck like physical blows. I had never known that Rebecca had asked for me, even in that abstract way. The thought of her remembering some essence of me, even as her memories faded, was almost unbearable. Jimmy remained uncharacteristically silent, recognizing that his role had shifted from interviewer to witness. The production team seemed frozen, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this unprecedented moment continue to unfold. "How is she now?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer from the way Lily spoke of her mother in the past tense. "She died last month," Claire answered, her voice softening slightly. "That's why we're here. Lily wanted to see you before we scattered Rebecca's ashes at Cape Cod. It was in her will. She wanted to return to the place where you proposed." Another memory surfaced, a windswept beach at sunset, Rebecca laughing as I knelt awkwardly in the sand, the vintage ring that had belonged to my grandmother glinting in the fading light. "I still have her ring," I said quietly. "I never could bring myself to take it back from her, and she insisted I keep it when we ended the engagement. Said I should give it to someone who had the time she didn't have." Lily's composure finally cracked, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "She kept your picture by her bed, even when she couldn't remember your name anymore." The studio lights suddenly felt too bright, too exposing. In that raw moment, my public persona crumbled, revealing the man behind the title, the coward who had run from heartbreak, who had buried his pain in ambition and achievement. The man who had left a dying woman to face her fate without him, no matter her insistence that it was what she wanted. I should have been there, I admitted, my voice barely audible. For both of you. As the weight of those words settled around me, I realized that this unplanned confrontation had exposed more of my true self than years of carefully managed interviews ever had. In the middle of Jimmy Carr's notorious hot seat, under the gaze of millions, I was finally facing the ghost I had been running from since long before I became James Reynolds, tech billionaire. In the quiet aftermath of the interruption, I felt an overwhelming surge of emotions that I had kept at bay for so long. Jimmy, sensing the gravity of the moment, gently suggested a commercial break. I nodded gratefully, removing my microphone with trembling hands as the on-air light dimmed. "Take 5, everyone," he instructed his crew before turning to me. "There's a private green room just off stage. Would you like to speak with them there?" I could see Melissa hurrying toward me, phone clutched in her hand, no doubt already strategizing damage control. I waved her off with a firm shake of my head. "Yes," I told Jimmy. "Please." The walk backstage felt like the longest of my life. Studio assistants scurried around us, avoiding eye contact as if my unexpected vulnerability was somehow contagious. A young production assistant led me to a small room furnished with a couch, 2 armchairs, and a coffee table adorned with untouched pastries. Moments later, the door opened again. Lily entered first, followed by Claire, whose expression remained guarded. The girl's composure was remarkable. She carried herself with a dignity beyond her years. "Hi," I said, suddenly feeling painfully inadequate. "What did you say to the daughter of the woman whose heart you broke? To the niece of a woman who rightfully despised you? You look different in person than on TV," Lily observed, studying me with her mother's analytical gaze. "Less impressive?" I attempted a smile. "More human," she replied simply. Claire remained by the door, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "We didn't come here to ambush you," she said. "That wasn't the plan. Lily just reacted when she saw you." "I'm glad she did," I said honestly. "How did you even get tickets to the show?" "I wrote to them," Lily explained. "I told them my story. About Mom. About you. A producer called us yesterday." Of course. The show's producers had likely seen dramatic potential in the story, the tech billionaire confronted by his past. What they couldn't have anticipated was how completely the confrontation would shatter my carefully constructed facade. The question forced me to confront memories of a past filled with regret, loss, and a deep-seated guilt that had haunted me silently. In that raw moment, my public persona crumbled, revealing the man behind the title. "I have so many questions," Lily said, sitting down across from me. From her small purse, she withdrew a worn photograph. Rebecca and me on the steps of MIT's main building, laughing at some forgotten joke, her dark hair blowing in the breeze. "Mom kept this until the end. She'd forget who you were, then remember again, then forget. But she always smiled when she saw this picture." I took the photo with reverent hands, tracing the outline of Rebecca's face with my finger. "She was the smartest person I've ever known," I said quietly. Her work on neural pathways was decades ahead of its time. "She was more than her brain," Claire interjected sharply. "You're right," I acknowledged, meeting her gaze. "She was kind, passionate, stubborn as hell. She loved blueberry pancakes on Sunday mornings and hated doing laundry. She sang off-key to Fleetwood Mac and could beat anyone at Scrabble." As I sat there processing the echo of Lily's words from the stage, I was transported back to a time when my ambitions blinded me to what truly mattered. I remembered the day Rebecca had first shown symptoms, forgetting simple words during a lecture, becoming frustrated and disoriented. The progression had been relentless, each doctor's visit bringing worse news than the last. "She made me promise to let you go," I told Lily. "Said it wasn't fair to either of us to stay, that she didn't want me to remember her as less than she was. And you listened," Claire said, the accusation clear in her voice. "I did, because it was easier than fighting," I admitted. "I told myself it was what she wanted, that I was respecting her wishes. But the truth is, I was a coward. I was 34 years old and couldn't face watching the woman I loved disappear. So I ran to California, started Next Tech, and buried myself in work until the pain faded. Lily's eyes never left my face. Did it? Fade? I shook my head. I just got better at pretending it had. Claire finally moved from her position by the door, sinking into the chair beside her niece. You know what the hardest part was? Explaining to a 6-year-old why her mother sometimes didn't recognize her. Explaining to an 8-year-old why her mother needed to live in a special facility. Explaining to a 10-year-old why her mother wouldn't be coming home again. Her words cut deep, as they were meant to. I remembered the neglect, the choices driven by selfish pursuits, and the irreversible distance I had created from those I once cared about. The confrontation with my past was as painful as it was necessary. I should have been there, I said. Not necessarily as Rebecca's partner. I understand why that had to end. But as her friend, as someone who loved her, as someone who could have helped you both. Instead, you became a billionaire, Claire said, though some of the edge had left her voice. Small consolation, as it turns out. A knock at the door interrupted us. The production assistant poked her head in, looking apologetic. Mr. Carr says we're back on air in 3 minutes, Mr. Reynolds. He understands if you'd prefer not to continue. Give us a moment, I replied. When she closed the door, I turned back to Lily. The Cape Cod ceremony, when is it? This Sunday, she replied. Mom always loved Nauset Beach. I remembered it well. The sweeping dunes, the lighthouse in the distance, the spot where I'd once promised Rebecca forever. Would it be intrusive if I came? I asked, directing the question more to Claire than Lily. Not to insert myself into your grief. Just to say a proper goodbye. Claire studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. It's what Rebecca would have wanted, she finally said, which wasn't exactly permission but wasn't rejection either. There's something else, Lily said. From her purse, she produced a small, weathered notebook with a blue leather cover. Mom kept a journal, even after she got sick. At the beginning, when she could still write clearly. She wanted you to have it. I took the notebook with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the unexpected gift. I don't deserve this. Probably not, Claire agreed, a ghost of a smile softening her features. But it was her wish, not ours. Lily stood, smoothing her blue dress with careful hands. We should let you finish your interview. This internal reckoning was not merely about regret. It was a catalyst for change. I realized that Lily's question was a mirror reflecting my innermost failings and the personal cost of my relentless drive for success. It was time to acknowledge the parts of my life that I had tried to forget and to embrace the possibility of redemption. Thank you, I said, rising to my feet, for bringing me her words, for giving me a chance to make amends, however inadequate. Mr. Reynolds? The production assistant was back, looking increasingly anxious. We're running out of time. I'll be there, I promised, not taking my eyes off Lily and Claire. But first, could I have your contact information? For Sunday. As Claire jotted down her number on a notepad, I made a silent vow to myself. Whatever happened in the remainder of the interview, whatever the public fallout might be, I would no longer run from the ghosts of my past. For Rebecca's sake, for Lily's, and perhaps, finally, for my own. With the interruption still echoing in my mind, I returned to the set. The audience had been briefed only that there had been an unexpected situation that was now resolved. They watched with heightened curiosity as I took my seat again, straightening my tie in a futile attempt to regain some composure. Jimmy looked at me with uncharacteristic gentleness. Welcome back, James. We can wrap this up quickly if you'd prefer. I shook my head. Actually, Jimmy, if it's all right with you, I'd like to address what just happened. He raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised. The floor is yours. The red light blinked on the camera, and I knew we were live again. I took a deep breath and looked directly into the lens, imagining the millions of viewers on the other side. For those just joining us, a few minutes ago, I was confronted by Lily Winters, the daughter of a woman named Rebecca Winters. My voice caught slightly on her name, but I pressed on. Rebecca and I were engaged many years ago, before Next Tech, before all of this. She was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease at 32, and I walked away when things got difficult. Jimmy stayed silent, recognizing that this moment of candor was rare and valuable, both for his show and perhaps for me. I decided to address the question head-on. The live broadcast became a turning point, as I spoke candidly about the regrets that had haunted me throughout my career. I explained how success had often come at the expense of genuine connections and the sacrifices I had made along the way. Much of my public image has been built around success, innovation, and decisive leadership. I continued. What you haven't seen is the cost of that success, the relationships sacrificed, the moments missed, the people let down along the way. I could practically feel Melissa's horror radiating from backstage. This was PR suicide by any standard measure. CEOs didn't bare their souls on national television. They didn't admit weakness or failure or regret. But Rebecca's journal sat heavy in my jacket pocket, and Lily's question echoed in my mind. The time for carefully crafted personas had passed. I've spent the last 14 years building a company that connects people's homes, that makes their lives more convenient and seamless, all while disconnecting from the people in my own life who mattered most. In that moment, I allowed myself to be vulnerable in front of millions, sharing details of a past marred by personal loss and professional compromises. The air in the studio felt charged with a mix of empathy, disbelief, and curiosity as I revealed the hidden scars that had shaped my decisions. The conversation shifted from corporate achievements to the human cost of ambition. Rebecca was a brilliant neuroscientist. Her work might have changed our understanding of cognitive disorders, might even have led to treatments for the very disease that took her from us. When she got sick, she made the choice to end our engagement. She didn't want me to watch her decline. And I was relieved. The admission tasted bitter on my tongue. I was relieved to have an excuse to run away from the pain, to bury myself in work instead of facing the hardest thing I'd ever have to witness. Jimmy leaned forward. That's a very human reaction, James. Fear is something we all understand. Maybe, I acknowledged. But it doesn't excuse abandoning someone you love when they need you most. It doesn't excuse leaving a child without the support she deserved. I thought of Madison, my own daughter, who had faced her parents' divorce without the emotional support she'd needed because I was too consumed with building Next Tech. I thought of my father, dying alone in Boston while I closed deals in Tokyo. I thought of every assistant who'd worked themselves to exhaustion because I demanded perfection without considering the human cost. Success without humanity isn't success at all, I said, the realization crystallizing as I spoke it. It's just accumulation. Jimmy seemed genuinely moved. What happens now, James? It was a good question, one I didn't have a complete answer for. I'm going to Cape Cod this Sunday to attend Rebecca's memorial service. Beyond that, I'm not entirely sure. But I know I need to make some changes. The studio audience, which had been silent throughout my confession, suddenly erupted in applause. It startled me. I'd almost forgotten they were there, had been speaking as if in an intimate conversation rather than a broadcast reaching millions. One last question, if I may, Jimmy said as the applause died down. You're known for your forward-thinking approach to technology. If you could go back and change one thing about your past, what would it be? I thought about it for a moment. I wouldn't change Rebecca's illness. That wasn't in anyone's control. I wouldn't even necessarily change our decision to end the engagement. She had her reasons, and they were valid. What I would change is what came after. I would have stayed present in her life, in whatever capacity she needed. I would have been there for Lily. I paused. I would have chosen courage over comfort. This turbulent admission was not easy, but it marked the beginning of a long overdue transformation. I began to see the interruption not as an attack, but as an opportunity to rebuild bridges and reconcile with the parts of myself that I had abandoned. The experience sparked an inner metamorphosis, setting me on a path toward genuine personal growth. As the interview concluded, Jimmy reached across to shake my hand. Thank you for your honesty, James. I think you've given us all something to think about. The lights dimmed, and the on-air sign flicked off. I sat there for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. My phone was already buzzing incessantly in my pocket. No doubt my executive team, board members, and PR staff all clamoring for explanations. Backstage, Melissa waited, her expression a complex mixture of professional concern and personal sympathy. That was unexpected, she said carefully. I'm sorry I went off script. Don't be. It was real. She handed me a bottle of water. But be prepared. Your phone is about to explode. The board is already calling an emergency meeting. The stock will probably take a hit tomorrow. I don't care, I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. Yes, you do, she replied gently. Just not as much as you care about this. which is probably how it should be. My driver was waiting at the stage door, ready to whisk me back to my Manhattan penthouse. Instead, I asked him to take me to Central Park. I needed air, space to think, time to process the seismic shift that had just occurred in my carefully constructed life. As we drove through the crowded streets, I pulled Rebecca's journal from my pocket. The blue leather was worn soft with handling, the pages slightly yellowed with age. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to hear her voice again after all these years. Then I opened to the first page, dated 2 weeks after her diagnosis. Today, I made the hardest decision of my life, she had written in her precise, scientific hand. I ended things with James. Not because I don't love him. I do, desperately, but because I love him enough to set him free. He thinks he wants to stay, to face this with me. But I've seen what this disease does. I've studied it, researched it, fought it in my lab for years. Now it's in me, and I can't bear for him to watch as I disappear piece by piece. Tears blurred my vision, making it impossible to read further. I closed the journal, holding it against my chest as the car wound its way through Manhattan traffic. Rebecca had thought she was setting me free. Instead, she had unintentionally sentenced us both to a different kind of prison, her to face her decline without the man who loved her, me to live with the knowledge of my own cowardice. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You okay back there, Mr. Reynolds?" "No," I answered honestly, "but I think maybe I will be." The 3 days that followed the Jimmy Carr interview passed in a blur of conference calls, emergency board meetings, and media speculation. Nextech's stock dropped 11 points in the first day, stabilized on the second, and began a slight recovery by the third. My executive team ranged from supportive to openly furious, with my CFO, Thomas, leading the charge against what he called my midlife meltdown on national television. Through it all, I remained strangely calm. For perhaps the first time since founding Nextech, the company's stock price seemed like a secondary concern. I'd read Rebecca's entire journal by now, twice, absorbing her words, her fears, her gradual loss of self as the disease progressed. The entries became shorter, more confused, until they stopped altogether about a year after her diagnosis. The final page simply read, "I think I'm still here. I hope I'm still here." Sunday arrived crisp and clear, a perfect New England autumn day. I'd arranged for a private jet to take me to Cape Cod, declining both Thomas's request for an emergency strategy session and Elise's offer to accompany me. This was a journey I needed to make alone. Nauset Beach was just as I remembered it. Vast stretches of sand, dunes covered in swaying beach grass, the rhythmic crash of Atlantic waves against the shore. A small group had gathered near the water's edge, Claire, Lily, and about 20 others who had loved Rebecca. They turned as my car pulled into the parking lot, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. I approached slowly, giving them time to adjust to my presence. Lily came forward to meet me, dignified in a simple black dress. "You came," she said, not a question but an acknowledgement. I promised I would. I held a small bouquet of forget-me-nots, Rebecca's favorite. "Thank you for allowing me to be here." Claire nodded stiffly from her position by a small table that held Rebecca's urn, elegant porcelain painted with delicate blue flowers. Beside it sat framed photographs, Rebecca in her lab coat, Rebecca on a hospital bed still smiling despite the advancing disease, Rebecca holding infant Lily with wonder in her eyes. The ceremony was simple and deeply moving. Friends and colleagues shared memories of Rebecca in her prime, her brilliant mind, her compassion, her determination to understand the very disease that would ultimately claim her. When it came time for me to speak, I stepped forward with uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Many of you don't know me," I began, "or know me only from what you've seen in the media. I was part of Rebecca's life when we were both young and full of impossible dreams. Hers to unravel the mysteries of the brain, mine to build technology that would change how people lived." I looked out at the ocean, gathering my thoughts. Rebecca achieved more in her brief career than many scientists do in a lifetime. Her research papers are still cited today. Her theories about neural plasticity helped shape our current understanding of cognitive disorders. I paused, but that's not why I loved her. I loved her because she could recite entire Shakespeare sonnets while making terrible scrambled eggs. Because she laughed at her own jokes before she could finish telling them. Because she never stopped being curious about the world, even when that world became increasingly confusing to her. In the final moments of the broadcast, I took a stand and embraced the uncertainty of what lay ahead. I expressed my commitment to making amends, to reconnecting with those I had neglected, and to rediscovering the true meaning of success. The atmosphere shifted from one of shock to a collective hope for change, both in my life and in the narrative I shared with the world. I turned to Lily. I didn't know your mother during the hardest years of her life. That privilege belonged to you, and to Claire, and to others here who showed more courage than I did. I regret that more than I can express. But I promise you this: her work will not be forgotten. Her struggle will not be in vain. After the ceremony, as Rebecca's ashes were scattered across the waves, Claire approached me. Her expression had softened somewhat. "That was not what I expected from you," she admitted. "I'm trying to be better than the man you knew," I replied. For what it's worth, Rebecca never blamed you. Not even at the end. Claire looked out at the ocean where her sister's remains now mingled with the endless water. "She understood why you left. That makes one of us," I said quietly. Later, as the gathering began to disperse, Lily found me sitting alone on the beach, watching the waves. She sat beside me, drawing patterns in the sand with her finger. "What did you mean," she asked, "about Mom's struggle not being in vain?" I'd been turning the idea over in my mind since reading her journal. Your mother was researching early-onset Alzheimer's when she was diagnosed. Her work was groundbreaking, but underfunded. What if Nextech established a research foundation in her name? Not just funding, but cutting-edge technology applied to neuroscience. Lily considered this. "You'd do that for her? After all this time?" "For her. For you. For everyone facing what she faced." I met her gaze. "It won't change the past. Nothing can do that. But it might change someone else's future." The experience taught me that even in the highest echelons of power, vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. I began to see every setback and every painful memory as a lesson that could lead to a more compassionate and authentic version of myself. The interruption had sparked an internal awakening that I knew would forever alter my journey. The next morning, back in New York, I called an all-hands meeting at Nextech. The company's 1,500 employees gathered in our main auditorium, buzzing with speculation about what fresh chaos their suddenly unpredictable CEO might unleash. I stepped onto the stage without PowerPoint slides or prepared remarks. "By now, most of you have seen the Jimmy Carr interview," I began, eliciting nervous laughter from the crowd. "I want to thank those of you who've expressed support, and I want to address those of you who are concerned about the company's direction." Thomas sat in the front row, arms crossed, expression skeptical. Beside him, Melissa looked cautiously optimistic. Nextech was founded on the principle that technology should enhance human connection, not replace it. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that mission in my own life. That changes today. I outlined my vision for the Rebecca Winters Foundation for Neurological Research, explaining how Nextech's resources and technological expertise could be leveraged to advance the fight against Alzheimer's and similar diseases. I announced a revision to our work-life balance policies, including increased parental leave and more flexible remote work options. Finally, I introduced a new corporate giving program that would match employee donations to causes they cared about personally. Some of these initiatives may impact our short-term profitability, I acknowledged. Our stock price might take another hit. But I believe that a company that values human connection, both within its walls and in the broader world, will ultimately create more meaningful and sustainable success. To my surprise, the announcement was met with a standing ovation, led, notably, by some of our youngest engineers rather than the executive team. Thomas remained seated, though I noticed even he offered a grudging nod of approval. As I left the set that day, I carried with me a renewed sense of purpose and an unyielding determination to transform the narrative of my life. Lily's unexpected question had opened a door to healing, and in that vulnerable space, I discovered that redemption was not only possible but necessary for a life well lived. That evening, I made 3 phone calls I'd been postponing for years. One to Madison, my daughter, asking if we could meet for dinner on her terms. One to my first wife, Sarah, apologizing for the ways I'd failed our family. And one to my mother, who had stood by me despite my gradual emotional withdrawal after my father's death. Then I opened my laptop and began to write, not a press release or a business plan, but a letter to Rebecca that she would never read. I needed to articulate all the things I wished I had said 14 years ago, all the regrets and missed opportunities, all the love that had never quite died despite my best efforts to bury it. I can't change the choice I made, I wrote. I can't go back and be the man you needed then. But I can try to be someone worthy of your memory now. I can try to help Lily. I can dedicate Nextech's resources to fighting the disease that took you. I can learn, finally, to face pain rather than run from it. I didn't know if these actions would be enough, if anything could truly make amends for my past failures. But as I looked out at the Manhattan skyline from my penthouse window, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the shallow optimism of rising stock prices or successful product launches, but a deeper conviction that even broken paths could lead to meaningful destinations. Lily had texted me earlier, a simple message. "Mom would have liked what you're doing." Those 7 words meant more than all the business accolades I'd accumulated over my career. The Rebecca I had known, brilliant, compassionate, unflinchingly honest, would indeed have approved of using technology and resources to help others facing her fate. The man I was becoming might, at last, have been worthy of her love. And while I couldn't change the past, perhaps I could honor it by creating a future that reflected the best of what we had once been together.